Talk a little bit about you and how you came to embrace Christ and therefore your ministry. What started you on this path?
Yeah, it's interesting. Embracing Christ. Which Christ? The Jesus who for a long time was simply my Savior. The main thing to do was simply to get to heaven. And that earth was just a place of pilgrimage and a valley of tears. And so I was going to be a good nun and holy and help people get to heaven. But then Jesus emerges and deepens because our sisters were in Latin America and working among the very poor, and people were actually being killed, and the suffering of people. And then it connected us with the suffering of people here in our own country. African Americans in my city that were living in the inner city, and police brutality, and public schools where kids could go to school and they were juniors and they couldn't read a third-grade reader. And I woke up that Jesus was in the poor, and I was out in the suburbs. And I moved in to the St. Thomas housing projects in New Orleans and got my real education in the gospel of Jesus and what it meant. And the people taught me. I'd grown up in white privilege. It put both of those words in capitals. My father was a successful lawyer, and growing up in the days of segregation, I only knew African-American people as our servants. I never questioned systems. I just thought everybody just be kind, be charitable to each other. Jesus said to be kind to each other. But then when I lived with the people, and I saw what was happening with the young men and the police, and I saw that every family had somebody in prison, the way we would talk about who was going to what college, I then began to see that. That is what changed me. It was encountering the suffering and the oppression that caused it, where the flame of passion began to grow in my heart. So my approach was, when I find out about an issue of justice where people are being treated unjustly, I'm going to do something about it. I will not be passive anymore. So in this environment, I come out of the Adult Learning Center one day, and a friend asked me to write. Would I write a letter to a death row inmate? I said, sure. It was the early 80s. We hadn't executed anybody in Louisiana for 20 years. And I got the name. I wrote the man a letter. His name was Patrick Saunier. And 2.5 years later, I'm in that execution chamber when they electrocuted him to death. And he's looking at my face. And that changed me forever. And then what happened, Marlo, is when I came out of the execution chamber, it was done in the middle of the night. Meanwhile, I do have to tell you, on the other side of the suffering, I met the victim's family, too. And saw, oh, my goodness, it's all inscrutable. It's all so beyond anything you can deal with, the experience of evil in people's lives and the loss of their children. But anyway, I realized, though, after making a mistake of not reaching out to them, that I needed to be on their side, too. So how are you going to reach out to both? And it became the image of the cross for me, that Jesus is always going to reach out to the suffering ones, to the ones who've been hurt. And so I began to do both. But when I came out of the execution chamber, then after seeing Pat killed right in front of my eyes in this protocol of death, that it defied description, because now they're strapping him in. Now they're going through their script. And we knew what the script was going to be. It's a scripted death. And then sure enough, they follow it. And all the guards do their job. They practice for the moment. You do right leg. You do left arm. They practice when the person goes peacefully. They get a guard of his height and size. And then they also practice when he fights them every inch of the way, because they have to be able to strap a man down to kill him when he's shouting in their face, "Don't kill me." And I came out. It was dark. It had been done after midnight. And I threw up. And I remember thinking, it was very clear, the mission really came. The people are never going to see this. It's a secret ritual. But I've been a witness. I got to tell the story. I got to find a way to bring them close to this reality. And so I began then to give talks. And then the book came. And then the movie came. And then the opera came, which is being shown here in Houston and opening. And art forms are the only way we have to bring people close to a reality that they're not going to see. It's story that people need to have. So when I go to give talks, I don't do lectures. I'm a storyteller. And luckily, I'm a Southern storyteller, so I'm going to bring them there. I'm going to bring them into all the dimensions of it and bring them over to both sides.
Well, it also seems like you are a voice not only for the victims' families and the condemned families, but also for the workers that have to go through this ritual. And
yeah, well, it's very important. It's a soul journey to deal with the death penalty. The reason it's still in place in this country is that people do not reflect on it very deeply, because it's not one of the moral issues that intrudes right into your life and you got to deal with it. You hear about it. You hear about a terrible crime. Oh, yeah, that's what the death penalty's for. So to be able to bring people close to the experience, and you have to help people, and this is part of my own experience too. There is outrage we feel when we hear of the terrible deaths of innocent people whose lives are violated, and they're shot in cold blood, or they're terrorized and kidnapped and hurt and killed. We have to deal with that outrage we feel. But then what are we going to do with the outrage? See, and it can easily be, so they kill, that's what the death penalty's for. Because I had no idea how this thing worked. I had no idea about how you go about selecting now. The Supreme Court is given as the criteria, supposedly, the criteria that we're going to make the application of the death penalty even-handed, and it's only going to apply to the worst of the worst murders. Now imagine this, to give us a criteria. Not your ordinary murders, not your garden variety, only the worst of the worst. Well, human beings have to interpret what that means. So in the 10 southern states especially, worst of the worst almost always means, did you kill a white person? Whose death causes outrage? Not all deaths. And it divides along race, and it divides along poverty or the status of a person in the community. If a homeless person's killed on the streets of Houston tonight, what are the chances that you'll hear any prosecutor or district attorney get on the TV and say a very valuable citizen was killed last night, and so we're going to seek the ultimate penalty? So finally, you always have to apply the law. You always have to make the criteria come alive in your community. So you have some prosecutors that want to cut a notch on their belt every time there's a murder, that where they feel they could get the death penalty, they're going to go for it. Others right next door go, nah. And now with the budget crunch and the money coming down. And then there's a huge change in Texas, because now you have life without parole, and the jurors used to not be told what the alternative was if they didn't give the death sentence. So here they are entrusted with the responsibility of keeping the community safe. Here's somebody who's done a very violent crime. They want to protect the community. So they would send a note down to the judge, if we don't give a death sentence, what will be the sentence? They want to be sure the person's going to stay in prison. And they would not answer them. So they don't want to take a chance, and they'd vote for death. Now jurors are told the alternative that is being given if you don't give death is truly a life without parole sentence. And that frees them up to be able to choose life and yet protect the community. So you've seen a drastic reduction in Harris County of death sentences coming down. It used to be a lot over 40 a year, and last year it was 2. Because, see, we need to tell the story of the jurors as well. They're just ordinary citizens like us. And you find yourself being called to jury duty, and then you find out it's a death case. then okay, I'll apply the law. I'll follow the criteria. I'll follow the judge's instructions. And then they find themselves locked behind a door in a room with 11 other people. And it comes down to that the life of that person is in every individual's hands, because if you don't vote unanimously for death, if one of you votes not to give death, the person lives. So you have live or die, literally, in your hands. And most people want to choose life. Most human beings do not want to kill a fellow human being or to be a part of that. Then the other thing, Marlo, that complicates it for people is, during the trial, here's the language. To the member, we're with the jury now. And ladies and gentlemen of the jury, look over at that victim's family sitting there. They are never going to see their daughter graduate from college. They are never going to see their grandchildren. He, in his crime, has deprived them of that. And I want to ask you to stiffen your spine, bite the bullet, do the really tough thing, and do justice for that family. And justice means a death. Only if he dies can we do justice and honor the dead loved one of that family. When you look at the cultural symbolism in that, a death, nothing less than a death will do. And that's the language that's used. And the ultimate legitimizing factor is we gotta do it for the victim's family. This is what honor demands. This is what justice demands. So give us death. And so you have this feeling, if you don't give death, you're dishonoring the victim's family. So in the movement nationally now in this country, the Illinois, the legislature just did away with the death penalty. Before then, New Mexico. Before then, New Jersey.
How many states is that now?
4. So it gives 16 states now that, and 4 within the last 4 years that have done away with it. And there are others that are going to follow. So we have a movement away from death, taking death off the table, which is what we need. And so we're on our way toward that. And